Amon let me keep some extra paper today. He told me I had to draw a picture of Neil Armstrong and him on the moon together. If it wasn't good, he said he'd gouge out my eyes. I'm pretty sure he didn't mean it. At least, not the part of him that's still a kid. But that other part of him, the one that's always lurking, that part doesn't make empty threats. The drawing's done now. I've got maybe 2 hours before he sneaks out before school, his little feet making soft noises as he heads down the concrete steps. 2 hours to write this, fold it up small, and tuck it behind the loose brick by my cot. 2 hours to explain why I'm sure, without a doubt, that one day Amon will kill me. Let's start from the beginning, yeah? Amon showed up in my 3rd grade class halfway through the year. The day before, Misha, the admissions officer, pulled me aside. "A new boy's joining your class tomorrow," she said in a low voice, leading me to an empty hallway. "There are a few things you should know." The few things turned out to be a nightmare in the form of a police report. 3 months before, a barefoot kid had been caught tearing apart the Quiet Dell service station, shoving potato chips into his mouth like he couldn't get enough. He was skinny, feverish but pale as a ghost, and his face was all sharp angles where baby fat should have been. One of the attendants had to stop him from tearing open chip bags, stuffing his face with Funyuns until his cheeks were about to pop. The cops were called, and they spent hours trying to get him to talk. No luck. Amon doesn't talk unless he wants to. An old woman finally recognized him. She'd seen him in the park with his mom, always after dark, always alone. She gave the address with a trembling voice and never once looked at the boy. Not even once. "I live on the same street," she said, shaky. 8 Sycamore Circuit, behind the caravan park. The cops bought him an ice cream, but it just melted in his hands. They drove him to 8 Sycamore Circuit, a crumbling Georgian house, with peeling paint and the weatherboards showing through. The grass was dead from the drought, covered in mud-caked toys and trash. Quiet Dell's no stranger to poverty, and these officers had returned plenty of kids to bad homes. The foster system was overloaded, and the few families that would take kids and had reputations that made condemned houses look good. So the cops stuck around longer than they probably should have. One officer went around the back of the house to peek through the kitchen window. That's when they saw Amon's mother, Miss Hutton. "She was dead," Misha said, trying to look serious, but I could tell she was enjoying telling the story. Halfway out of the kitchen, like she was trying to run. "I've met her before, you know? Quiet, tiny thing. Anyway, she was a mess. Her chest was all torn open, ribs wide, guts hanging out but still attached. And here's the worst part. Her heart was gone." Maybe Misha realized I didn't like the way she was enjoying the story, because she quickly added, "Anyway, it's been a few months, and they think he's stable enough to join the other kids. He's a bit quiet, you know? Maybe sit him at the back." On his first day, Amon showed up in a second-hand uniform that hung off him like a deflated balloon. He moved strangely. His head stayed level, and he almost glided instead of walked. When I introduced him to the class, all 23 kids stared at him with that intense curiosity only 3rd graders have. Amon just stared back, unblinking, until one by one the others looked away. By recess, the whispers had already started. Lily Martinez told me Amon had stayed completely still the whole break, just watching them play. "He was counting," she said, tugging on her braids. "Every time someone touched someone else, like tag or high fives. He was keeping score." Tommy Reeves swore Amon had followed him to the bathroom, standing outside the stall, breathing so quietly that Tommy thought he'd left, until he opened the door and found Amon right in his face. But I'd seen this before. My little brother, Lucas, had been different too. Smart, but couldn't figure out the unspoken rules of childhood friendships. I'd watched him stand alone at recess, memorizing the playground patterns instead of playing. The other kids called him creepy too. So, when I caught Amon hanging around after art class, staring at my demonstration porcupine with its popsicle stick quills and crayon details, I saw a chance. He was so focused, head tilted awkwardly as he traced each line with his eyes. "Would you like to show me what you drew, Amon?" He turned to me with that unnerving, steady stare. After a long moment, he took his paper from his desk and held it out to me like it was some kind of offering. The drawing made my throat tighten. Dark circles covered the page like open wounds, each one carefully shaded. They didn't look like holes. They looked like mouths, opening into somewhere dark. Between them, twisted figures were bent in ways they shouldn't be. In the center was a small figure, bound in heavy chains. "Who's this?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Me," Amon said, his dark eyes boring into me, like he was waiting to see how I'd react. "Why did you draw yourself like this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Because that's what Mom did," he answered. "Oh, Amon, that's horrible," I said. I wasn't any better than Misha. My curiosity bubbled up. "Do you know why she did this?" "To keep the wicked in," he replied. My heart broke for him. Here was a kid who had been through so much, and now he was expressing all that pain through his drawings. I knelt down to his level and took his hands in mine. I remember being surprised at how hot his palms were, like he'd been holding them up to a fire. "I know," I told him softly. "You've been through a lot before you came here. But I want you to understand, it wasn't your fault, okay? And as long as I'm around, you'll always have someone to talk to." Then Amon wrapped his arms around my waist, holding on tight. His face pressed into my stomach, and I could feel him breathing in deeply, almost like he was trying to memorize my scent. He clung to me for longer than felt normal, like he was copying an embrace he'd never really known. In that moment, I thought he was a strange kid, but a kid, nonetheless, and it broke my heart to see him like that. I should have thrown him out the window. "You're not like her," he whispered into my shirt. "You're good. You'll be better." I awkwardly patted his head, trying to ignore how tightly his fingers dug into my back, like he thought I might disappear. When he finally let go, there were 10 perfect bruises on my skin. The first incident happened during spelling bee practice. Sarah Chun had just spelled necessary, right? And I gave her a stamp on her hand as a reward. I didn't notice Amon's reaction, not at the time. But later, during recess, Sarah came running to me, crying, with her friends huddled around her. She had wrapped a scarf around her hand, the blood staining it purple against the cornflower blue fabric. After a lot of coaxing, she finally showed me. My stomach dropped. "He said I had to get it off," she sobbed. So he held my hand against the wall and kept scrubbing until the star was gone. When I confronted Amon, he just stared at me with that same unnerving calm. "Then why did you give it to her?" he asked. "If you knew it would upset me?" He was suspended for 3 days. But they said he'd had a rough childhood, that he was just a kid. Sarah Chin's parents didn't push it much. They let it go. No counseling, no checks, no special support, nothing. After that, the other kids started refusing my rewards if Amon was around. They'd shake their heads quickly, eyes down, mumbling "no thank you" before hurrying back to their seats. But it wasn't just about the stamps anymore. A week later, Tommy Reeves made the mistake of asking me for help with his math during lunch. An hour later, I found him locked in the supply closet, with a message scratched into his arm with a pencil. "Miss Tilly is busy." When his parents threatened to press charges, Tommy changed his story. He said he did it to himself. He switched schools the following week. Lily Martinez brought me an apple one morning. Her family owned an orchard, and she was always bringing me fruit. By the afternoon, she was in the nurse's office with stomach cramps. They found pieces of glass in her lunch bag, mixed in with her fruit. Tiny bits of glass, carefully placed there on purpose. Amon's attachment to me only grew stronger. He'd wait by my car every morning, even though his foster family dropped him off long before school started. He started leaving drawings on my desk. At first, they were sweet, showing us together in different places. But over time, they changed. In some, we were underground in candlelit rooms. In others, we were the only ones left, with everyone else as blurry shadows in the background. When I hung up other kids' artwork, he'd scratch their names off and write his own in their place. I was relieved when Michael suggested dinner. It felt like a chance to pretend things were normal, to focus on something other than Amon's growing obsession. Michael looked great in his police uniform, fresh off his shift. Being with him felt safe. After a few glasses of wine, I started telling him about Amon's behavior, about the injuries, about the drawings. Looking back, I was uneasy, but not really scared. He was still just a child, After all, lonely, yes. Damaged, definitely. But still a kid. Maybe if I'd recognized the obvious signs, I wouldn't be in this mess now. Michael let me finish talking, then leaned in across the table. There's something you need to know about Amon's mom. He glanced around the restaurant before continuing. You remember that cult? They've got compounds all over the country. Phoenix, Utah. Hell, just down the road in Driftwood. The Brides of Christendom, I said right away. Of course, I knew them. They were infamous. They showed up at my front door at least once a month. Yeah, Michael said. Well, she was a runaway. You're kidding. Nope, he said, leaning back and grinning, clearly pleased with my surprise. She might have gotten away, but a lot of that messed up stuff stuck. I guess she couldn't shake what happened to her in that cult. Lorraine Hutton was one twisted woman. What do you mean? He leaned forward, his voice dropping low. There was a room down in the basement. We found journals, logs she'd kept, detailed notes on the treatments she'd put Amon through. I swallowed hard. Do I really want to know? You don't, but I'm telling you anyway. She'd chain him to this metal chair, custom-made, his size. Leave him there for days, all shackled up. She'd recite Bible verses, Latin stuff, exorcism-type chants, and she watched his food. His calorie intake was way too low. It was like she was trying to see how much she could starve him without killing him. We found prayer boards, nailed with nails, and she'd make him kneel on them. I covered my mouth. Oh my God. It gets worse, Michael continued, his tone grim. We found this device, he trailed off, his eyes past me. I turned. Amon stood at the table, perfectly still, dressed in a shirt that was too big for him, with his foster family hovering behind him. The air grew cold. No, not cold, but that icy chill that comes with pure, raw anger. A muscle twitched in his jaw. Michael tried to smile. Hey buddy, how are? My mom used to pray too, Amon interrupted, his voice soft but filled with hate as he stared at Michael. I couldn't believe how intense his glare was, like he wanted to burn a hole through him, right up until the end, even when I was pulling things out of her. Amon, I snapped. Don't joke like that. Are you fucking him? Amon asked harshly, jerking his head toward Michael. Amon, his foster mom, and yelled. She was vaguely familiar to me. A serial foster mom, in it for the money. A couple of my kids had stayed with her in the past, always with that hungry, lost look about them, and put a big hand on Amon's shoulder and gave me a mortified look. I'm so sorry, she said. He's doing a lot better, but sometimes, let's go, Amon. We'll order you something nice. She led him away, but he didn't let up. He kept staring back at us over his shoulder. Before I could process anything, I heard a small voice beside me. The youngest daughter from the foster family had stayed behind, nervously twisting her pigtail. Are you Miss Tilly? She whispered. Yes, I am. Are you Amon's mom? I blinked. No, I'm not. Oh, she hesitated. He says you are. You should be careful. He didn't like his last mommy. That night, I woke up suddenly. At first, I wasn't sure why. The house was quiet, just the wind rattling the branches outside the window. Michael was lying next to me, breathing steadily, but something didn't feel right. You know that feeling? When your instincts pick up on danger before your mind does. That feeling that makes your skin crawl and your mouth dry? I stayed still in the dark, debating whether to wake Michael. I told myself I was being paranoid. I was just on edge. Then I thought I heard footsteps. Now, our old Victorian house was known for its creaks and groans, like it was alive. I'd been living there long enough that it didn't make me jump at every sound anymore. But these steps were different. They were too clear. I must be losing it, I told myself. I quietly got up and tiptoed down the stairs, my bare feet silent on the hardwood. Each step felt like a mile. The living room was full of strange shadows from the streetlight outside, making everything look unfamiliar. The wind howled through the old vents, sounding almost like whispers. I followed those sounds, moving through the empty kitchen, the wide living room, until I stopped in the moonlit hallway. The front door was wide open, leaves scattered on the welcome mat. My heart pounded in my chest as I walked up to it. Just the wind, I told myself. The house had been built in '52, and the door latch was always a little off. Still, my hands shook as I closed it, locking the deadbolt with more force than necessary. The walk back upstairs felt longer, darker. I found myself looking over my shoulder every few steps, even though I couldn't explain why. When I finally made it to the familiar dark of our bedroom, relief flooded through me. Michael was just as I'd left him, lying still with one hand under his pillow. No more snoring, thank God. I settled beside him, letting out a shaky laugh. Then something hot and wet touched the back of my neck. I froze, my hand reaching for the bedside lamp. I turned it on, flooding the room with light. I screamed. The sheets were soaked, dark red, spreading out from Michael's chest like a blooming flower. Where his sternum should have been was a gaping hole, dark and hollow. And there, sitting on my pillowcase, warm and dripping, was his heart. Amid my screams, I heard Misha's voice, distant and echoing in my mind. And, this is the sick part, she told me. She was missing her heart. I spent the night at the police station, Michael's blood still drying under my nails, in my clothes, in the cracks of my hands. They'd given up trying to get me to change out of my nightgown. My voice was hoarse from all the screaming, but I couldn't stop talking, couldn't stop trying to make them understand. You don't understand, I kept saying, rocking back and forth. You didn't see him with the other kids. The things he'd do when someone got too close to me. The detective shook his head. Miss Tilly, the damage to your husband's body, it was severe. Brutal. We're talking about injuries that would need a lot of strength. No child could. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't make them see it. Michael's murder is still unsolved. 2 months passed in a blur of police interviews and sleepless nights. I hadn't stepped into the school since Michael's death, couldn't bring myself to face the tiny desks and cheerful bulletin boards. But Quiet Dell was a small town, and Michael's life insurance barely covered the funeral. Bills kept coming, one after the other, reminding me I couldn't keep hiding forever. I slept in the living room now, on an old couch, staring at the TV. The stairs up to our bedroom might as well have been a mountain. Sometimes, I'd find myself staring up into that darkness, remembering the warmth of Michael's blood, until my throat tightened and I had to look away. The job search wasn't going anywhere. Quiet Dell's economy was built around the school, a grocery store, and a few family-run businesses. After the third rejection, I knew what I had to do. The house needed repairs before I could sell it. New carpet, fresh paint, and that meant money, which meant going back to school. The administration was understanding, almost embarrassingly so. They agreed to let me finish the school year, accepted my resignation in June, and promised I wouldn't have to teach him on. He's in Mrs. Peterson's class now, the principal assured me. You won't have to interact with him. I'd expected a monster when I finally saw him in the hallway. Some sign of the darkness I was sure was behind his eyes. But when I did see him, he barely looked my way, just talking with 2 other boys. He seemed normal, happy, even. Doubt began creeping in. Had grief warped my memories? Made me imagine things that weren't there? The months dragged on. My students were quieter, maybe, but nothing like the chaos I'd seen before. Amon played with the other boys on the playground, laughed, ran around. He'd pass by me in the hall and shout a cheerful, "Hey, Miss Tilly," before running off. I started questioning myself. I was torn between knowing something was wrong with the pale boy with the dead cultist mom and feeling guilty that I might have blamed an innocent 8-year-old for Michael's death. On my last day, my students gave me flowers, dandelions, wild daisies, and carnations with the plastic still on them. The bouquets piled up on my desk, a farewell made of childhood love. Then Amon appeared in my doorway during lunch, a piece of paper in his hands. "I made this for you," he said, the first words he'd spoken to me in months. The drawing showed 2 figures sitting together in what looked like a basement or cellar, surrounded by strange shapes I couldn't make out. We were both smiling, my arm around his shoulders. The longer I stared at it, the more wrong it felt, like staring at your own reflection for too long until it becomes someone else. "Thank you, Amon," I said, offering a parting word. Whatever. I was leaving Quiet Dell behind, and I wouldn't look back. The moving company had come the day before. The house had sold quickly, under market value, but I didn't care. My college roommate had offered me a spare room until I got back on my feet, and I grabbed the chance with both hands. I couldn't spend another minute in this town. I came back just long enough to grab my old convertible, packed with what little I thought was worth saving, and took grim satisfaction in watching the "Welcome to Quiet Dell" sign shrink in my rearview mirror. The roads were empty as I drove out of Quiet Dell, my headlights cutting through the dark. My phone's GPS said I had 8 hours to Monica's place. If I pushed, I could get there by sunrise. The trees pressed in on either side, casting strange shadows across the road in my high beams. Then a small figure stepped into the road, and everything turned upside down. I jerked the wheel hard, tires screaming as I fought for control. The world spun wildly through my windshield. Trees, road, sky, trees again, before slamming into a brutal stop with a crunch of metal and glass. Pain bloomed across my chest where the seatbelt dug in, and something warm trickled down my face. Through the spiderweb of the shattered windshield, I saw him coming toward me. The headlights illuminated his small body, casting long shadows behind him that seemed to writhe and stretch with every step. My head was spinning, my vision blurry, but I could still make out his smile, too wide, too knowing. He appeared at my window, pressing one tiny hand against the cracked glass. The shadows behind him grew darker, larger, swallowing the feeble light from my busted headlights. "It's okay, Miss Tilly," he whispered, his breath fogging up the glass. "We're going to be a family now." The darkness took me. I woke with the taste of copper in my mouth, cold cement against my cheek. The room was huge, windowless, filled with twisted shapes. Chains hanging from ceiling hooks, tables with restraints, things I couldn't name, but whose sharp edges and cruel curves spoke of their purpose. A child's nightmare made real. "You're awake." Amon's voice was bright, full of joy. He knelt beside me, gently brushing hair from my face. "I was worried I'd hurt you too badly, but I was careful. I've gotten better at being careful." "Why?" My voice cracked on the word. "Because you're going to be my new mom," he said, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. My last mom didn't get it. She thought the machines could keep the bad parts locked away, but they just made them stronger. But you're different. You understand me. And if you're good, if you really love me, I won't have to hurt anyone else. Not my foster family, not the kids at school. They can all stay alive. The worst part was how sincere he sounded. The desperate need for connection warring with something darker, hungrier, lurking in his eyes. I thought of Michael's chest, torn open, of Miss Hutton's missing heart, of all the small cruelties I'd ignored. "Of course I'll be your mom," I whispered, watching his face light up with a joy that was both terrible and triumphant. Our days fell into a routine. He'd come over before school, bringing McDonald's breakfast or stolen Pop-Tarts, talking about his day while I ate. His foster family never questioned where he went, not after what happened to their rabbits. After school, he'd curl up beside me for hours, seeking comfort like any child, while I stroked his hair, told him stories, and pretended this was normal, that this was love. Sometimes, he'd ask me to use the machines on him, his mother's legacy of pain and restraint. To keep the wicked parts quiet, he'd say, tears in his eyes, "I don't want to hurt you like I hurt her. She didn't understand, but you do. Right, Mom?" I'd do it, telling myself it was just survival. That each day I kept his focus on me was another day his classmates went home safe. Another day his foster family's pets stayed alive. Another day I might find a way out. But there were moments, becoming more frequent, when the mask would slip, when the thing wearing a child's face would look at me with eyes older than time, hungry for something more than a mother's love. Those were the moments I understood what his real mother had tried to contain, what she died trying to control. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up, how much longer I can feed into this twisted little domestic fantasy, how much longer before the creature wins over the child. I'm writing this down so someone, anyone, will understand, so they'll know what to look for if, when, I disappear, like his mother did. Because Amon is still growing, and his hunger grows with him. And the really worrying part? He tells me there are others just like him. I've been here for days now, alone with Amon in that cold, windowless room. I've tried everything. begged, pleaded, even threatened. But nothing works. His smile never fades, not even when he asks for more of the machines, when he demands I fix him. His twisted affection is suffocating, but somehow, I'm still here, alive. I'm still breathing. I'm not sure how much time has passed. The days blend together in a haze of monotony, the dark corners of the room closing in on me. But there are cracks in the walls now, faint, spider-webbed fractures that weren't there before. A sign? I don't know. Sometimes, I think of Monica, of her warm house, the promise of safety, the life I could have had. I think of the life I was meant to live before this nightmare started. But those memories feel distant now, like they belong to someone else. Amon grows stronger. His appetite, his need for control, it's becoming unbearable. I can see the change in him. His eyes, his posture, even the way he moves. He's becoming less like a child and more like something else. Something ancient, something hungry. And I'm starting to understand what he meant when he said there were others like him. I'm not sure what will happen when he finds them. I've made my choice. I won't survive this. I know that now. But maybe, just maybe, I can't keep him occupied long enough to give someone a chance. Someone who might be able to stop him before it's too late. Before he finds them all.